Good day to you all. Welcome to Big Ideas for Small School Bands. My name is Joe Angelo, and I'm pleased that you could join us for this clinic. I'm presenting this clinic in the hope that you could take away some new ideas and a structure to help inform building up your own band program. Before we dig in, let me give you some of my background. I live in Geneseo, Illinois, and I graduated from the high school there. I had roughly 200 people in my class, so I wouldn't say I came from a real small school environment. I followed up high school with undergraduate studies in music education at Western Illinois University, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in music education degree from Kent State University in Ohio. When I finished my undergrad, I acquired my first and current position at Galva, Illinois, in the school district there, where I've been since 2015. On the side, I also teach drumline at United Township High School in East Moline, and I'm also the founder and director of Conquest Drum and Bugle Corps, which is a sound sport competitor. Sound Sport completed their first season in 2019 at DCI World Championships in Indianapolis as part of the Sound Sport International Food and Music Festival. So, needless to say, I've got a lot going on. Now, out of curiosity, can we have a show of hands for everybody watching this? How many of you teach a small band program? So who has less than 50 students? Okay, who has less than 30? Less than 20. The numbers keep dwindling. And less than 10. Okay, if having less than 10 students is something you've ever dealt with, kudos to you. It's a very challenging thing to do. During my time at Galva, my smallest band size was 12, so that was my first year. We jumped ahead in our slides a little bit. Okay. As we discuss small band programs, it's really important to acknowledge that small schools are very common here in the United States. One of the greatest challenges of teaching small band programs is that sometimes you are the guy or gal. The only director is the point. It's incumbent upon you to provide a successful music experience for your students, and you may be working with very little. You may not have a lot of help with music instruction, and you may be just the only one constantly advocating for your program. Obviously, you want to advocate for the sake of keeping music in the lives of your students, but it may also mean justifying your own teaching position. We will discuss advocacy in depth more later. A small school is often the product of circumstance. If the school exists in a rural town with a small population, then your school's enrollment will likely reflect this. The issues that these schools face will likely correlate to issues the town itself may face. Matters such as population, local economy, and community support can create a unique impact on a small school. With that said, these issues unique to small schools are issues that schools in larger towns or cities may not have to deal with. Strike 2008 summed it up nicely. Rural small schools are naturally occurring small schools, meaning they occur by the very nature of being in a rural community. The problems they face often concern how to cope with the liabilities of smallness. They often aspire to be and struggle to be comprehensive schools. So these schools want to offer the same resources as any other school, but due to their inherent challenges, small rural schools tend to struggle to achieve this. We're going to begin examining the issues small schools face, and I'm going to use my own school district as an example. It is a prime example of what a small rural school district commonly will look like. So here's a little bit more about Galva. As you can see in this graphic, it is in the southern part of a physically large county. It's situated in northwest Illinois, about almost exactly between Peoria and the Quad Cities, about 45 minutes to either municipality. And if you're not familiar with the Quad Cities, it's 4 large cities on the Iowa and Illinois side of the Mississippi River, Moline, Rock Island on the Illinois side, and then Davenport and Bettendorf on the Iowa side, just in case you've never heard of it. So let's look at the demographics. The city of Galva has roughly 2,500 people. It's very much a farm town, surrounded by miles and miles worth of crops and farms. The school district serves the city and the students who live there, but there's also a large number of students who live outside the city or on farms in rural unincorporated communities. The Galva School District has historically always been a relatively small district. However, in recent years, the enrollment numbers seen in the school have been of great concern to the staff and community. To give you a more definitive picture of the makeup of the school environment, this table has some statistics about enrollment and ethnicity. The entire district is made up of 2 school buildings. Currently, the district has 488 students, with 210 students at the junior-senior high school, which is grades 7 through 12, and 278 students at the elementary school, which is pre-K through 6th grade. Generally speaking, the total enrollment of the school district is decreasing. For example, when I started in Galva in 2015, the high school had 170 students in grades 9 through 12, so freshmen through seniors. The 2020 statistics for the 9 through 12 population is now at 139 students. So there's been a drop of 31 students in 5 years. As you can imagine, such a drop in only 5 years has been of really great concern to the district administration. And from my perspective as the band director, I'm aware of the impact this might bring upon my band program if the pool of potential students continues to decrease. Recruiting for bigger band enrollment will become a greater challenge over time. So if possible, if you're in a similar situation, you might want to consider trying to find this kind of info about your own school. For Illinois teachers, it's really easy. You just go to IllinoisReportCard.com, search up your school, you find all that information. I don't know about how to find this in other states, in case you're listening to this and you're from another state. But I'm sure if you go to your administration, they could probably point you in the right direction. Now here's a snapshot of the demographics of the surrounding schools in the area. Generally speaking, most of the schools are very similar to their in the statistical numbers compared to Galva. However, Kewanee, the Kewanee School District is kind of an exception. It's a bigger district than the others listed. For the region, Kewanee is kind of a unique case just in that it's a larger town with a history of job creation from manufacturing, some railroad influence, etc. If you've ever heard of Kewanee boilers, it's a historic big thing that's come out of that town. And Wethersfield is also kind of unique because it's actually within city limits of Kewanee. And there's like an old village, unincorporated village, I think, called Wethersfield that ultimately was just absorbed by the city of Kewanee over time. There has been some talk about consolidating the 2 districts, but it's always been put up to a vote, and the city usually votes against it. It's been an issue they've been putting up for election for years and years, and it's just the citizens have always been against it. But now here's a little bit more about my program in Galva. I started at Galva in 2015, and I was tasked with rebuilding the band program after some director turnover and problems that occurred during my predecessor's tenure. Without getting too detailed, my predecessor was not hired back after 2 years, and there was some declining quality in the program. My first year, I had 12 students in the high school band, which was scary to say the least. I had no idea how I was going to build up that band program into anything meaningful, and I really didn't know what I was walking into when I took the job. But fortunately, I was able to build the program over time. The high school band had 19 students in my 4th year. That continued into my 5th year as well. And we were on track to have 22 students for this past school year for 2020, but the pandemic really threw a wrench in things. And several kids were kind of discouraged from rejoining band in such a weird situation. So we ended up with 15 students, which is not a massive drop, all things considered, but it was still a drop nonetheless. But over this time, if you don't include the pandemic, we were able to improve our retention from fifth grade all the way through high school up to senior year. In fact, in 2018, we achieved 100% retention rate, which was a tremendous success for our program and a great sign of things to come. As a result of the changes we implemented, we rebuilt the marching band, all of the concert bands, the pep band, and the overall arts program started to become really meaningful in the school and the community, of course. So, what were the issues that we faced over in Galva? Well, I already mentioned our relatively low number of students. With that, the students lacked many musical skills. And as a result, also, the interest in musical achievement because they lacked those skills. The equipment situation was very poor. Just many broken instruments and facilities just falling into disrepair. The year before I started, the marching band, or the director, did not have the marching band actually march. They didn't do a field show. They kind of put a parade band together for homecoming, but it was not looked upon favorably. And I know for certain that was one of the reasons why this particular person was let go, because the administration especially was very unhappy about it. The community wasn't happy either, but the administration especially was unhappy about that. The marching band is so public, they need to look good, and that just reflects so poorly on your band program. And the boosters were really underutilized, and there was very little support from the parents as a result. I wouldn't really say it was parents' fault necessarily. It's just the director was not really reaching out very much, trying to do too much himself. And when you leave parents out of it, it's only going to become messier and messier. You lose your audience, and you lose a lot of support. So, and as you can imagine, too, with a booster organization, because they fundraise, there was a lack of funding as well. So the band program did not have a lot of money, and they weren't doing very many fundraisers. And they had, a lot of issues with performance, as far as basically the director was not having them perform very much. And so the students got very little experience with performing, and the literature choices were pretty poor as well. I mean, we're talking pep band music for a fall formal band concert. It was not good. It was not ideal for study, was the big thing. All the performances were very unsatisfactory, underprepared. And the community, any audience that did come, was pretty disappointed. And so as a result, the band program was really in a very negative light. People were not happy with it, and it needed serious change, to say the least. So many of the problems we were facing in Galva were certainly unique to Galva. However, many of the aforementioned issues can be tied to common issues that any small band program could face. We, like other small bands, had trouble with band enrollment. To aid in our enrollment challenges, we upped our recruiting game with our beginners at Galva, which resulted in healthier numbers moving forward. But nonetheless, recruiting, while it's an issue we had to deal with like other small schools, it's pretty much meaningless without a plan for retention, which was something else we had to work on in Galva. Funding is a universal concern amongst pretty much any band program, big or small. But it's definitely scrutinized, I would say, in a small band program as well. And finally, instrumentation can be really unique in a small band, depending on your group of students and why some of the and I think it was part of why some of the repertoire choices were just really poor. They'd have a heap of brass or even just a heap of trumpets and no woodwinds, and so it was a lot of pep band music as a result. And the previous director, honestly, he didn't take any creative steps to address the instrumentation problems, and this resulted in some very poor music choices. So, what can be done about these issues? Well, we're going to take a look at each of these issues and see what research suggests we can do. Let's first look at band enrollment. The first consideration is ethnicity and diversity. Elpis and Abro, 2011, in their article, looked at the demographics of students in music ensembles across America. They ultimately found that white students primarily represented the student enrollment in band, choir, and orchestra programs. They found that minority students were underrepresented. So what kind of impact does this have on a small school band? Well, the school's curriculum should be careful to make sure the needs of all students are met. With that said, the teachers and administration should examine whether or not the curriculum reaches out to all ethnicities within the student population, doesn't just focus on what might be interesting to the majority. This might mean looking at a curriculum that emphasizes music of different cultures and incorporating diversity within the curriculum itself. Even in a school like Galva, where diversity may be lacking, the curriculum should step out and look at different music of the world. This emphasis on variety and looking beyond American or European music will do a better job reaching more students. A director should also consider the socioeconomic status of every student as well. What are the expectations of your band program? Do you expect your student to purchase their own instruments, or are you able to provide instruments from the school's stock? Are students expected to pay for all materials, including folders and binders, reeds, cleaning supplies, among other things? These financial questions may need to be addressed, and your expectations might need to be laid out for the students and their parents. In my experience, this can really make or break a student's involvement in the band. So you might want to be prepared to loan out an instrument. And according to Hoffman, in her 2013 article, it's not uncommon for students of a lower socioeconomic status to be enrolled in remedial or special education classes. This can occasionally create scheduling conflicts and prevent the student from being part of the band. It is very important to work with the student and your school counselor or whoever makes the schedules to make sure that they can be involved in the band. Hoffman also made the point that sometimes students may enroll in band during the school day, but they may not attend any after-school band events. And this could be due to the student's family not owning a vehicle, or they're unable to get a ride to and from these after-school events. So some personal issues within their family could be a factor. Mom or dad could be working late and they're unable to get a ride as a result. And I can tell you, in my experience, I've encountered students, usually high schoolers, who have to work after school in order to help support their family financially. And in these situations, you have to assess each individual situation and work with the respective student to see what they can accomplish in the program under their circumstances. Now, looking at both ethnicity and socioeconomic status a little more broadly, the primary question that should be asked is, how does a student's background affect their participation in band? As we've already discussed, there are several scenarios that can make getting a student involved in band more challenging. Lamb's 2010 book chapter discusses Froelic's 2007 article discussing webs of interaction, essentially meaning that music and how it relates to social context all interweave. Different groups of people and their music all weave in different ways infinitely. For every individual learner, these interactions cause a student's musical experience to constantly evolve. This is something to consider in the design of a curriculum, as the choices of music to study will make a truly unique experience for your students, unique to them, and each individual student's experience will ultimately still be just a little bit different from their peers. So, if a piece of music could potentially move a student emotionally just from hearing it because it reminds them of their grandfather or something who's passed away, whereas another student may not have that same kind of experience. That's kind of a basic example, but these are the kinds of things you should consider as you design your program and design the curriculum. And, while this is true of any band program, your number one focus should be creating the best possible music experience for your students. I think that's true of any program, really. And yes, small schools have issues to face, but there are some very important positive aspects of small schools to consider. Often you might be the only band director in the district, teaching every student from beginning band all the way through high school. Now, the advantage of this is that you are your own feeder. This not only means that you know what your students know and when they enter your high school program, but you have some control over what your students are learning before they graduate to higher levels of band. So by the time they get to high school, you know how to get them ready for high school, and you're the one doing it. You're not relying on another director to do that. If you win over your students earlier in their band careers, you got a good chance of keeping them all the way through high school. And another advantage of small schools is that there might be some limitations on the number of programs the school offers. As a result, your program may not conflict with other school activities with regard to practices, meets, and other events. If the events of other activities do potentially conflict, then communication with the coach or sponsor of these programs will probably be less of a challenge just because there's less of them to try and coordinate. And classroom management is often a bit easier with less students as well. There may be a difference in how to handle a smaller ensemble versus a bigger ensemble, but working with a group of 20 students would typically be less challenging than working with a group of 100 or so. And it's also easier to build a rapport with your students if there are less of them. In my experience, band rehearsals can occasionally function more like a class discussion than a typical director-led rehearsal. It's easier to ask leading questions and help students reflect on their playing in a smaller ensemble. Along with this, you as the director can give greater individual attention to your students if you have less of them to manage. Stopping a rehearsal to help one student succeed is not it's not going to be detrimental to the flow of the rehearsal if in a smaller group. Berge, 1989, had an article where he says to focus more on providing quality education regardless of the number of students you have. And in that same article, actually, he went as far to say that students in large ensembles would benefit greatly if they played in smaller chamber ensembles on a regular basis for all the same reasons that, we've already mentioned. He felt actually large band programs should structure the class day for musicians in that way. Okay, so now let's move on to advocacy. It would be wise to make a definitive and clear plan for how you'll advocate for your program. This plan should be easy for your administration and the public to understand. And here's an example of that. Stevens and Davis, 1994, wrote an article laying out what a small Texas school district did to build up their music program and create a well-rounded music department. The music staff had created a 4-phase plan that involved the reorganization of the band students into groups based on each student's ability levels as a means of maximizing the director's time with the students and giving them the most meaningful musical experience possible. Sounds a little bit like, in a way, what Berge was suggesting. They also laid out plans to start new music ensembles, including choir and jazz band, so it sounds like they were really starting from scratch. This would involve hiring additional staff, which the funding for such would be accomplished through a review of finances and budgeting for personnel. So they had suggested as well that, they should cut 2 PE positions and replace them with aides, because aides tend to be cheaper to hire. And then that money could be reappropriated to more music staff. And the proposed plan was effective because they had laid out a plan, a definitive and reasonable plan that centered on what the school already had available to them, and the suggestions, and they made suggestions for change within the district. And instead of just making a wish list and saying, we'd really like to have this, they created the ideas, they offered the ideas and solutions on how to achieve these goals. And I can tell you, in my own experience, I had to do something very similar with marching band uniforms. After I had talked to our superintendent about it, and he, in our district, he organizes the budget every year, and he suggested that I should request half of the funds needed for the uniforms. They would pay for it up front, but ultimately they would pay half, and then the band program, whether through the boosters or on its own, could fundraise the other half of the cost of the uniforms. And the board really liked that idea, and he knew the board well enough to know that that plan was going to work, and they unanimously approved it. And fortunately, the band program successfully fundraised $9,000. We're not a very big band, but that's about what we needed to pay our half of the uniforms. But again, the plan was laid out clearly, so the board would understand what we were trying to accomplish and how to get there. And all of this, again, was aided by our administration. Perhaps you're in a situation where the school board is looking at budgets and funding, and there is some question in the air about the music department's place in the school. And, while it's ideal to advocate for your program based on the intrinsic value of music to students, it might be beneficial to look for specific studies related to the cognitive benefits of music and its relation to standardized testing. Fitzpatrick, in 2006, published an article in a study looking at the test scores of K through 12 students in Ohio. They were looking for a correlation between students who participated in the performing arts and those who didn't, and how that impacted test scores. And some of you are going to say, duh, to this, but they did find that students who participated in the performing arts, on average, achieved higher test scores than those who didn't. Now, again, you might be thinking this is kind of obvious, but the point of the study is that there's details within the study that are there to help you justify your point if you ever have to make this claim to a school board or administration. Because it isn't enough just to make a claim, music makes kids smart. You can't just say that. If you have some research, a study to back it all up, it's going to help you in your advocacy plan. And it's going to justify all of these questions. So, it's worth gathering articles. It's worth gathering information that you can use to potentially justify what it is you're doing. And one last thing about advocacy, and this is a big one, that also might seem like kind of a duh thing for some of you, but try to have a parent booster organization supporting your program. And there's a few reasons why this is important. For one, parents involved in the boosters can serve as program advocates. They can also, they can be the ones who speak positively for the band and choir around the community, help bring some positive attention to your program. They will also be the ones to take videos and pictures and put them on social media, so it's a lot of good PR for you. If you have these parents in your corner, they can make your program look really very good. Not to mention they help guarantee an audience at concerts. And probably the more obvious reason, though, for having a booster organization is they help you fundraise money for the program. In Galva, for example, we usually have a dessert fundraiser after each concert. Parents will bring desserts. They'll ask other parents to bring in desserts before the concert. The boosters will serve them after the concert, and there's usually like a little, I don't know, $3 a plate, something like that. And for us, that's been a cool $500 every time. But they'll also help you in fundraising campaigns. So if you're doing, fruit sales or candy bars, whatever it is your program does, they can help you conduct those. They can help you with the logistics of running those kinds of fundraisers, doing the legwork, car washes, all those kinds of things. And they'll also take, some of that material probably back to their employer and, tell their coworkers about it. And so they're raising money that way too, making connections in that way that you couldn't really do by yourself easily anyway. And another important consideration about having parents involved in the boosters is that such an involvement does make an important statement about the importance of the music department. Time seems to be everything to parents and families these days. And if parents are willing to give that time, and sometimes their talents as well, to the program, this really says to the community and the administration that music is a worthwhile investment. It sets a good example for the music students to see their parents supporting the arts in this way. And it shows that the music department is important beyond their time in school, that there's an educational, intrinsic value to it. Retention. Certainly, you have to have students in your band, and retention is an important consideration to make in order to keep your band going. Mixon, in 2011, suggested a few ideas to implement in a band program in order to aid retention. So revolving enrollment may be necessary to embrace. This means that students may start on one instrument and need to be switched to another over time. This might be out of necessity, like, you become short on clarinets, or you have, when you have 4 or 5 saxophones already, you switch a kid over. However, it might be the result of a student not liking their initial choice of instrument. And yes, it might mess with your instrumentation a little bit, but it's more important to keep the student involved. So give the student what they want so they can have the experience that, again, intrinsically will make them happier and give them a meaningful music experience. Peer tutoring is also an important idea to incorporate, according to Mixon. This accomplishes several things. This will aid any students who might be struggling on their instrument. The student tutor will also gain a positive experience looking at music in a different light as the teacher, as opposed to being the student. In general, this system will help keep everybody's skills in line and keep the ensemble on the same page. In a small band, this tutoring might even be accomplished from students who don't necessarily play the same instruments as another. You might have a top-notch trombone player and a flute player who's not so great at rhythm and reading notes, perhaps. So that trombone player might be able to help that flute student with those basic skills that really every musician needs to know, like note reading and rhythm and things like that. And that corresponds to any instrument. So you could still tutor in that scenario as well, have peer tutoring, I mean. It's also important to consider what a student is able to do with regard to practice. And this kind of harkens back a little bit to the socioeconomic status and those considerations. I have found in my own experience that many students are not able to practice at home. And in my early years, I have to admit, I used to kind of ignore that. I kind of just insist, practice at home, figure it out, practice at home. That's kind of what I would say. But over time, I realized that there were very much genuine cases where students really were not able to practice at home. And again, thinking about the student's background, it can affect their involvement in band. And I can think of a few occasions where I've had beginning band students approach me and say that they just can't practice at home. I remember one student said to me, that their mother worked third shift and she slept at night, so after school. And in that case, she couldn't practice while her mom was asleep. So when these kinds of situations arise, it's really important to consider what you can do as the director to help that student find a way to practice. Maybe you can work something out for them during the school day, before school, maybe after school, maybe even as part of like an after-school program that your school offers. But when it comes to practicing, help that student look for every possible option to get the practice time in, because we all know how important it is. But again, you should also be compassionate to their situation, because it might just be out of their control. They might not be able to do anything about it. A little bit more about retention. We hinted at this earlier when we were talking about some of the positive aspects of teaching a small school band. You might just be the only band director in the whole district. So, and actually, in fact, some of you could be the only band director in the whole, you could be the only music teacher in the whole district, band or choir, or maybe even general music. God bless you if you have to do all three. While this might make you very busy, there is some advantage to it, though, when you think about rapport. You might just work with the same kids for several years, and many students appreciate having the comfort of having the same teacher for many years across different schools, perhaps. So this can really be beneficial. Gergel, in their 2015 article, suggested 5 strategies for fostering relationships with your students. First one, and we're going to go through all 5, ensure that they experience continual musical achievement. So be certain that all of your students have a positive time in band and that their performances are successful and meaningful. Next one, you as the teacher should take responsibility for initiation of these positive relationships. You can be sure students will not do this on their own. However, you can easily control this by making every interaction with your students positive and enjoyable. Third one, becoming culturally competent by viewing personal experiences and understandings as culturally situated instead of the norm. And the idea here is always make sure you're looking at the students' backgrounds, which we've already talked about, and the things in their lives that affect them, as opposed to making some assumptions about them based on generalities. Like I was saying earlier, that I took on the attitude, every kid needs to practice, just figure it out. Well, sometimes that is just simply impossible, so you have to look at every situation. Next, caring for students with humility and caution by working to understand students' culturally situated understandings and values. And similarly to the previous idea, have the humility to know that you're going to make some mistakes sometimes. But be sure you're showing your students that you are keeping their best interests at heart. Let them see your mistakes and own up to them. And then finally, constructing an environment where students are seen as equal contributors to learning with teachers. This speaks to the concept of student-led learning. It is harder to create a meaningful learning experience for teachers if you're only lecturing. Help them get involved in their own learning and give them opportunities for self-reflection. It helps them with self-reflection. It gives them an intrinsic meaning, a meaningful learning experience. Okay, now on to a little different idea, musical independence. And that is a goal that every music teacher, regardless of ensemble size, looks to achieve for their students. However, this has been commonly studied among small music ensembles, as the need for musical independence appears more obvious with less performers than an ensemble. It has been my experience that getting students in a small band to perform confidently takes a lot of work, but it can be done. Wiedner's 2015 article lists 3 elements for consideration in developing musical independence in students. First one is the environment of the band. Do you offer some clues around the classroom? Meaning, maybe some fingering charts or scale sheets or other visuals that can give a student a chance if they need some extra help in the moment. Do you host an environment of support and peer rapport? You as the teacher need to set the tone for the rehearsal in a positive way. Students should seek to support each other in the challenge of learning music, and there should never be any teasing or self-consciousness placed on anybody. Next one, speaking of setting the tone, is the instruction should be teacher moderated. This is not the same as teacher led. Teacher moderated means that you should guide or scaffold, if you remember back to your education classes, your students in their learning. But they should be leading the learning. So help them out, but they should be leading it. Independence will follow if they get enough practice in being responsible for their own musical learning. And finally, the last one, student-led engagement, which we're pretty much already mentioned here. Again, the emphasis here is letting the students take charge of their own musical experience. You as the teacher should guide them, but the students should try to analyze their own playing and take on the challenges inherent of learning music. All 3 of these ideas connect to each other, so they are not mutually exclusive. You are the captain of the ship, and the students are the wind in the sails. They push it forward, you guide them. Okay, so now on to a topic of personal interest to me, music arrangement. And I'll tell you right now, it helped save my band program. So when I finally embraced the idea of arranging the music for my band, the quality of performances and my students' learning experiences exploded. In particular, we have always had problems with instrumentation and getting voices covered. If you have even basic arranging knowledge, it can really address the problems of odd instrumentation. You can also meet the educational needs of your students more readily. There's no shame in watering down music for a student who might struggle with certain notes and rhythms, but arranging the music yourself lets you give the students a completely customized experience that addresses their needs, but also exploits their strengths. You can create successful performance experiences this way, and again, you do this by exploiting the strengths of your band and giving your band an achievable challenge. This is also a great way to expose your students to great literature that you might not always think your band could otherwise play due to instrumentation issues. A few years ago, the Galva Band, I had arranged a concert of all Alfred Reed music, the high school band, that is. Now, granted, we weren't doing Praise Jerusalem or Armenian dances, these huge pieces, but I picked 3 meaningful pieces that could be easily arranged for a smaller band, and they were short enough to address concerns related to endurance. Specifically, we played 2 bagatelles, which was available as a build-a-band arrangement. We'll talk about flex band and that kind of thing in a moment. Then The King of Love, My Shepherd Is, and which was written, actually, it was a commission by our friends up at United Township, where I teach drumline. And because that was based on a hymn, that was actually a really, it was easy to find the SATB format to arrange it into a thick instrumentation for a small band. And then Slavonic Folk Suite, which, if you're not familiar, is basically the best parts of Russian Christmas. It's like the first part and the fourth part, made a little bit easier. And again, because that's kind of based on hymn-like music, you can find the SATB format there too. And again, 2 bagatelles. I didn't have to do the arranging for it because it was pretty much already set. But King of Love and Slavonic just needed changes for instrumentation's sake. I didn't change the basic structures of the pieces, the length, or anything like that. And this really did give our students an exceptionally meaningful experience of some great literature from a really great composer, and we did it with limited instrumentation. And just to give you a little more idea about it, for Slavonic Folk Suite, which has a lot of clarinet in it, well, at the time we didn't have any clarinets, like just none in the high school band. So what we did was I arranged, I think it was 3 or 4 parts, but I basically put it on 4 mallets, and I had a kid who, actually a very good marimba player, play all 4 of those clarinet parts on marimba himself, and it actually came out very beautifully. But again, just it requires creativity. And a year later, we did same kind of thing, and we had done "Flourish for Wind Band" by Vaughan Williams, and "On a Hymn Song of Philip Bliss" by Holsinger, and I even actually wrote my own composition for the band, which I had a lot of fun with, admittedly, but the kids really liked it too because they felt part of that creative process. And if you have that ability, go for it. I think that's, it makes for a great experience for you and definitely for them. And it might just spark an interest in composition for them too. Okay, flexible instrumentation music. It's a great option for small bands. Flex band, admittedly, early on confused me a little bit. I didn't quite get it initially. But once I understood it better, worked with it more, I really learned to love it, and I use it pretty regularly as a solution to pick meaningful and educational lit. And if you're not familiar with it, basically here's how it works. The composer arranger will take work from an SATB piece, whether it's something perhaps they wrote or arranging from something like that. So that way there's always 4 parts covered. And then the parts are set up in a way that each SATB voice is covered, and there are multiple instrument options to cover those SATB voices. Now, usually the score also keeps range in mind. For example, a tuba will probably not play part 1 like a soprano line. However, there might be parts where tuba will cover the 4th line or the 5th line, so like baritone, bass, that kind of thing. And on the other end of the spectrum, flute is not going to cover a bass line of parts 4 and 5. Instead, flute would cover parts 1 or 2, so like soprano or alto lines. So with this, technically speaking, if you had only 4 or 5 wind players, you could actually cover a whole piece with that many players. It's really quite clever and promotes doubling of parts to help build some confidence in your players. And percussion parts are often separate and plentiful, just in case you have an inordinate number of percussionists versus wind players. And a lot of times the mallet parts are often written to kind of double up some of the part 1 parts as well, so it's something worth keeping in mind. There are several band music publishers who have embraced this concept and have built their own libraries of repertoire. Probably the biggest publisher of this music is Hal Leonard, but there are others like Alfred Stanton's, C.L. Barnhouse. They have their own version. They have different names for it. Like Barnhouse calls theirs Build a Band, but it's all basically the same concept. Now, to be honest, in my opinion, some of the literature is a little bland, but you can find some great pieces if you dig deep enough. There are some great pieces that are originals formatted for FlexBand, like a lot of stuff by Sean O'Loughlin is really pretty good. We played one of his called Visigoths. It sounded great and had a great kind of educational basis to it, but it was like, sounded good. It wasn't cheesy in any way. I can tell you from experience, the FlexBand concept is really useful. It's useful to know about it, if you are arranging for your own band. If you do write music for your own band, it's very useful to arrange pieces where you can find the SATB parts inherent in the original work. This is usually evident in band pieces based on hymns, I have found. So those are good sources if you're looking for music to write. Wind band excerpts. So another idea that I found to be useful is the use of wind ensemble excerpts as sources of individual study on each instrument. If you're lucky enough to have the time to work with your students one-on-one or in small groups during the school day, this is a great idea to get your students trying other kinds of music and getting a chance to play some lit that they might not otherwise play in their small band. For example, if you have a baritone euphonium player with some skill, you might pull out the opening statement from Holst's First Suite in E-flat and ask them to work on it. It's a very well-known piece of music for the euphonium, and that you might not be able to do that piece with the whole band. Could be a skill level thing, could be an instrumentation constraint. I got this idea from Brune's 2010 article, and he pulled the idea from just string players. And they study orchestral excerpts regularly. And there's plenty of great representative literature for wind instruments found in wind band libraries. You might not be able to play Lincolnshire Posy with your band, but some of your players could potentially study excerpts from that work. So through that, your students could play the music of Granger, Vaughan Williams, Reed, and other greats of the wind band genre just by this excerpt concept alone. You might have some of these great works in your band library, although they might be a bit dusty. So you could dig those up and use them. You could also find the excerpt you want from a score and just type it into a notation program and print it out. And actually this way too, you could build up a personal library of excerpts, and then you could just use them again and again with future students. Let's talk about marching band in small schools. I can tell you from experience that teaching a small marching band can actually really be a lot of fun. It's very important for your school to build a good marching band because it reflects positively on the school as a whole, and it is, without question, the most visible part of your program. Your audience at football games will definitely have people that from the community that probably aren't going to see a band concert. So it's good to make a good impression in this situation. Now, arranging the music for your marching band might be a necessity. While pop music can be fun for a band to learn and play, sometimes the arrangements are more difficult than one might think. While popular music can be useful in the learning process because the students are presumably, anyway, already familiar with the tune and how it should sound, however, the melodies of pop music sometimes have complicated rhythms that aren't often evident when it is sung. And in order to ensure a successful performance experience, you might have to alter the rhythm slightly to work in a way that is more manageable for the students to learn. Like we've already discussed, it can be very useful to write this music for yourself. However, if you have the means to do so, hiring an arranger would be a good option too, because you got a lot going on with marching band. Just make sure to keep copyright matters in mind and, throughout the process. Picking published music is usually a safe option for this reason, but there are some great public domain works that people would recognize and could make for a fun show. And also, don't forget about the educational goals of using custom music in marching band. Consider the challenges your band members might need to work on, but also play to their strengths. Promote a successful performance experience for your kids. I commonly use soloists when I've got talented kids who can stand out. If you have lots of percussionists or an awesome drum set player, take advantage of that. And it helps fill the time, gives your wind players a chop break within the show, and it just makes the whole show extra interesting. All right, to start kind of wrapping things up, I'm not going to lie to you when I say that when I first started teaching the small school, I was really worried. I would find any satisfaction or fun in the experience. I am pleased to say that I personally accepted the challenge and really ended up having some great times with my students. It has been lots of fun to see them grow and in their abilities, in their talent, and I have enjoyed the creative challenge of making a small band successful. It's been very, very rewarding to see the growth of the band in both size and ability, and it's extra satisfying to see the community excited about our band program. And I can attest from experience, working with a small band really can be a lot of fun. So, with all that in mind, does anybody have any questions as you're watching this stream? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So, well, I just want to thank you all so much for coming to this presentation. If you do have questions or concerns or just anything you want to chat about, my contact info is up here on this slide. The first one is my work email. Feel free to contact me there. If you're curious, the Galva Band does have its own website, galvaband.org, if you want to see a little bit about our band program. Contact info there as well. And then just also, if you're curious about Conquest Drum and Bugle Corps, conquestperformingarts.org is a good source for information on that. So thank you all again for attending, and I hope you have a great day.